Choose work or family. That's what my boss, who also happened to be my sister-in-law, told me when I asked for 3 days to bury my father. I'm Kaylin. I'm 34. And that was the moment I realized I didn't belong to my family. Or my company. I was just a placeholder. A liability. But what Vera didn't know was that I walked away with something they never bothered to value. Something worth 39 million. And by the time she realized what was gone, it was already in my name. No tantrum, no warning. Just a quiet stroke of a pen, and the empire she built on betrayal started to crumble. See, they wrote me up for wanting to bury my father. But what they actually buried was their own future. And I was the one holding the shovel. So tell me, have you ever been forced to choose between family and work? Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have done what I did? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. They didn't just bury my father. They buried me with him. At the funeral, the pews were half empty. Not a single person from Wilder Tech showed up. Not Vera. Not even my brother Dean. They were too busy with a deal to hold my mother's hand or look me in the eye. I stood at the front of the chapel in a black dress that still smelled faintly of his hospice room. The air was thick with lilies, and grief sat like lead in my chest. I read the eulogy I'd written on No Sleep, my voice flat until the last line. He taught me that silence can be generous, but never let it become permission. My voice cracked. No one clapped. No one cried. Just stained glass saints and my mother's trembling shoulders in the front row. After the service, I overheard a woman near the vestibule whisper, "Vera says Kaylin's stepping down soon. Maybe it's for the best." She didn't even lower her voice, like my entire life had become an HR memo they'd forgotten to send. That night, I sat at our old kitchen table, where Dad used to fix my science fair projects. My hands shook as I opened the envelope again. The same one Vera flicked off the table like it was nothing. The paper inside felt heavier now, soaked with the weight of everything I'd lost. Then my phone rang. "Ms. Morgan?" A gravelly voice. "It's Walter Finch, your father's counsel." I froze. "Yes, this is Kaylin. I'm so sorry for your loss," he said gently. "But he left something for you. A clause in the original founder's trust. Something he wanted you to see privately. Not the board. You." My throat tightened. "What kind of clause?" He wrote it after his second stroke. Updated it before he passed. There's a set of keys and a folder. He didn't want them to see it unless they forced your hand. Forced my hand. I looked down at the envelope again. My father didn't just believe in me. He knew this moment would come, when grief would be weaponized, when legacy would be used like a sword. I pressed the paper to my chest and wept for the first time since the hospice. Not because he was gone, but because even in death, he had left me a thread. A lifeline. A map through the fog. The next morning, I drove out while Mom slept upstairs. The keys Walter had mailed rattled against the console. The storage unit was buried behind an abandoned carpet warehouse. I signed a clipboard, walked down a hallway that reeked of mildew and fluorescent lights, and opened Unit 17. There it was, a briefcase. IBM. Vintage. A peeling label read, "Founders Agreement, 1996. Inside, I found Dad's handwriting, and a clause highlighted in yellow. If a majority shareholder denies reasonable bereavement leave to any founder or direct descendant, voting privileges transfer to the minority founder pending ethics review. I read it again and again. The words didn't just settle in my brain. They anchored in my bones. My father hadn't just left me something. He had left me power, and a reason to use it. The day after Dad's memorial, I returned to work like a ghost in a power suit. No one made eye contact. The same conference room where Vera had tossed away my grief now buzzed with talk of scaling and agile pivots. Not one person asked how I was holding up. My title was still on the org chart, but I felt like an afterthought someone had forgotten to delete. I poured myself into the acquisition project, Vera's pet initiative. Late nights became the rule. At one point, I remember nodding off at my desk, forehead pressed to a spreadsheet, only to jolt awake when the cleaning crew turned off the lights. My badge still worked. My calendar still pinged. But I wasn't invited to the core strategy calls anymore. Vera had quietly rerouted them to Dean and Elliot. "Don't take it personally," Dean said over lunch one afternoon. "Vera just needs alignment. We'll loop you in when the dust settles." But the dust never did. 1 week, then 2. My name vanished from the email thread announcing new advisory roles. Even my assistant, Monica, was reassigned to better support executive needs. I found out when I showed up to my office and her desk was gone. When I finally asked Vera directly, cornering her after a budget review, she didn't look up from her tablet. "You're still valuable, Kaylin. But right now, we need execution, not emotion. Try to see the bigger picture." I did see it. Every time I opened the company portal and found a new process realignment, it became clearer. I was being erased, one polite memo at a time. Meanwhile, I kept covering for Mom's bills. $1,800 a month for her utilities, prescriptions, and food deliveries. Dad had always handled it discreetly. Now it fell to me. Vera knew, of course. She saw every finance report. Yet when I once mentioned shifting my work hours slightly to drive Mom to a cardiology appointment, Vera raised an eyebrow. "Hire a car," she said, "or hire help," as if family was a liability, not a legacy. On weekends, I sorted through Dad's journals and old design sketches, trying to reconnect with something that felt like purpose. He used to say, "The code is cleanest when you're clear on your values." I wasn't sure what mine were anymore. I just knew this wasn't it. Then came the quarterly town hall. Vera took the stage in a white power dress, unveiling the company's vision for Wilder 3.0, a slick new branding package, a bold pivot to machine learning. Not once did she mention Dad. Not once did she acknowledge the founders who built the bones of the company she now called hers. As the applause faded, I clapped too, but only because I knew I was done clinging to the shadows. Something inside me had begun to solidify. Not anger, not yet, but resolve. I returned to my desk that afternoon, expecting silence. Instead, a formal memo awaited me. Subject line: Performance Review Clarification. I opened it, fingers already tensing. Due to recent concerns regarding insubordination and inappropriate prioritization of personal matters during high-level initiatives, the Executive Committee recommends temporary reassignment and compensation reevaluation. I stared at the screen. Insubordination. That word again. They were rewriting my grief into misconduct. I scrolled further, hoping, maybe foolishly, for context, an ounce of humanity. Instead, the final line. This memo serves as a record of warning. Failure to demonstrate realignment with company values may result in permanent removal from advisory channels. They were phasing me out. Silently. Officially. Without saying the word termination, they'd found a legal way to ghost me out of the very company my father and I had helped build. Vera didn't confront me. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharper than any memo. I stepped into the hallway, needing air, sanity, something that didn't smell like betrayal. But even there, whispers trailed behind me. Isn't she the one who took funeral leave during the merger? Heard she's out soon anyway. I pressed the elevator button 3 times before realizing my hands were shaking. That night, I sat on the floor of my father's study, knees pulled to my chest, his leather journal in my lap. Mom had fallen asleep hours ago. The walls smelled like old books and sandalwood. I turned the pages slowly, like they were scripture. And there it was. Tucked behind a photo of us in the company's first server room, a sticky note in his handwriting. When they start rewriting history, it's time to find your own pen. Tears slipped down my cheeks, not out of sadness, but out of clarity. They weren't just pushing me out, they were erasing me. The next morning, my inbox contained one more blow. The company's annual report. I opened it quickly, heart pounding. Page 7. Founders. Vera's name. Dean's name. A vague line about legacy advisory roles. No mention of mine. Not even a footnote. I wasn't a founder anymore. I was history they'd already rewritten. I closed the file, lungs tight. I didn't know what the next move was, but I knew I wouldn't go quietly. I picked up my phone. One name came to mind. Walter Finch. Mr. Finch, it's Kaylin. You said Dad left something for me. His voice was calm but alert. Yes, a sealed file. He instructed it to be shared only if your position in the company was compromised. I believe that time has come. I met him at his law office before lunch. He handed me a simple manila folder, aged at the corners. He wrote this after his second stroke, Finch said. He knew the board would try to dilute your stake, so he rewrote the bylaws in secret, with a clause that activates under ethical violation. I pulled the papers out, heart thundering. There it was. Clause 8.2, in Dad's handwriting, co-signed by legal counsel. If any founder's descendant is denied reasonable bereavement leave, all voting powers held by the majority shall be suspended until an ethics committee rules otherwise. He'd written it for me. He saw them coming. And he gave me a fuse. By the time commuters clogged Route 50, I was already in the garage beneath Wilder Tower, hands steady on the steering wheel, heart even steadier. Last night, I promised myself I'd stop waiting for permission. This morning, I planned to prove it. The quarterly board meeting always began at 9 sharp. I rode the elevator alone, listening to the soft whir of cables and the softer echo of Dad's words in my mind. Quiet choices, loud power. The doors opened to level 20. People glanced up, then looked away as if my grief were contagious. Inside the glass conference room, Vera sat at the head of the table like it was her throne. Her tablet lay flat, knuckles white around the bezel. Dean sat 2 seats down, eyes fixed on the label of his bottled water like it held the answers he never gave. I took the seat nearest the windows without waiting to be offered one. Vera didn't greet me. She simply said, "Let's begin." Slides flashed. Quarterly margins. User acquisition rates. The kind of phrases Vera loved to pronounce as aggressive growth. She was just clicking to the next graph when the door opened. Thomas Reed, Wilder's lead counsel, walked in, envelope in hand. He handed it to Vera without a word. She slid it open, read the single page, and her shoulders locked. Stiff. Controlled. Reed cleared his throat. Per legal directive, voting privileges for executive actions are suspended under Clause 8.2 of the Founders' Agreement, he said calmly. Signed by founding shareholder Kaylin Wilder Morgan. You could hear a pin drop. Someone exhaled. What? Like they thought it might change the reality. Vera gave a tight smile. This is symbolic, she said. Nothing more. But her fingers had started tapping the table. Fast. Panicked. Elliot, a younger board member who'd joined during my last maternity leave, frowned. Wait, she's still a founder? I met his eyes. Apparently symbolic founders can still freeze executive action. I slid a folder across the table. Its label read, Clause 8.2, revised and notarized. A flash of gold caught the recessed lights. Flash memory hit me. That first return from maternity leave, I'd scrolled the company's annual report, looking for my name. It wasn't there. When I asked, Vera had laughed. Legal probably trimmed the list. Nothing personal. The next quarter, my title shifted from founder to advisor. A word that sounds respectful until you realize it comes with no vote. They hadn't fired me. They'd painted me invisible. Now the paint was peeling. Vera's tone sharpened. Kaylin, this grandstanding hurts everyone. Investors especially. I opened another folder. This one labeled Compensation and Ethics Audit. I asked for 3 days to bury my father. I said, calm. You chose quarterly earnings over basic decency, so now I'm choosing not to disappear. Dean finally looked up. His voice cracked. You can't be serious. I'm as serious as the clause you never bothered to read, I answered, soft enough that the room had to lean in to hear me. You once told me family titles don't matter here, that I was welcome only if I stayed useful. Well, today I'm reminding you I'm useful, and I'm an owner. Elliot scribbled something fast in his notepad. 2 directors exchanged glances. Reed stayed near the door, stone-faced. Vera hissed through her teeth. This will stall the acquisition. Stocks will slip. I met her gaze. Then maybe the stock needs to learn respect. I stood. Chairs scraped back. No one followed her. They followed me. In the hallway, my reflection in the glass didn't look like someone coming undone. It looked like someone who had just remembered who she was. On a crisp Saturday in October, I took my 8-year-old son Evan to the cemetery. He balanced a shoebox in both hands. Inside, a hand-painted model of the new garden we'd built where Wilder Tech's first warehouse once stood. The gravel crunched beneath our steps as we made our way to Dad's headstone. Evan knelt beside the granite slab, carefully placing his miniature trees and benches, just like we'd planned it. "Grandpa would have liked it," he said, brushing soil from his knees. I knelt too, tracing my fingers along the cool engraved letters of my father's name. I didn't speak for a long moment. The garden now stood as a sanctuary, open to anyone who ever needed a place to breathe. No passkey, no hierarchy, no gatekeeping. Just green space, quiet, and legacy. "He does like it," I finally said, watching the sunlight catch the edge of the bronze plaque. "And I think," I added, voice softer now, "he finally found peace. Maybe we both did." Evan slipped his small hand into mine, and we stood in silence while clouds drifted unhurried above us. Life, of course, kept moving. Shareholder meetings, PTA fundraisers, board votes. But the weight I'd carried for years, the silencing, the dismissal, the way they called my grief a liability, was gone. What replaced it wasn't just victory. It wasn't even justice, though I got that too. It was clarity. Because in the end, the most valuable thing I reclaimed wasn't the company, the equity, or the headlines. It was the quiet certainty of my own worth. My father had spent decades building Wilder Tech, but his last gift to me wasn't a corporation. It was the lesson that you don't need to raise your voice to raise your power. That silence, when chosen, can roar. That what others call inconvenient can be exactly what saves a legacy. I used to think strength meant being indispensable, proving yourself, staying useful, staying quiet. Now I know better. Strength is refusing to disappear, even when they hand you the door. Strength is writing your father's eulogy while the board prepares your replacement, and still showing up with your head high. Strength is saying, no more. And when Vera tried to twist that narrative one last time, when she filed her lawsuit, tried to say Dad had been manipulated, I didn't need to shout. I let her own signature speak louder. When we won the countersuit and her shares reverted to the penalty clause, I didn't celebrate. I archived the ruling, turned off my notifications, and spent the evening walking the garden paths in bare feet. Evan running ahead of me, laughter echoing through trees my father had once planted as saplings. We don't always get to rewrite history, but sometimes, if we refuse to surrender ourselves, not even the smallest part, we get to reclaim it. So no, I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I just took it back. And what I rebuilt? It wasn't just a company. It was a name. And this time, no one gets to erase it. Have you ever been dismissed, not with words, but with silence? Have you ever had to fight just to be seen, not as emotional, not as difficult, but as whole? Tell me your story. I read every single one. Because maybe the quiet ones? We were never weak. We were just waiting for the right moment to roar.